Right, hopefully this is working. Um, Today, or tonight rather, as it is in the UK, I'm going to be doing a political test to measure where I am on the political compass. And subsequently, um, this test was sent to me several times by an anonymous user on Curious Cat. Um, that's quite a few times, and they seem pretty insistent that I take this test. I'm not a massive fan of political compass tests. I find them to be a little bit, unnecessary to defining yourself politically. Like, it's all right having yourself like a label, but to take every single question to find out where you are and then basing it on that seems a little bit unnecessary. But it's been asked of me, and I thought, why not? Why not indulge someone's request? So here we go. If there's any audio issues, just put in the chat and I can see it and adjust it, hopefully. I think I should be fine. Slowly but surely, my skills in this department are improving. So away we go. Page 1 of 6. Just a few propositions to start with concerning, no less, how you see the country and world. Question 1. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Now, naturally, it should be fairly obvious to anyone watching this that I'm pretty left-wing myself. I view world in the sense that capitalism is the problem of the world, and we should be addressing and ultimately removing capitalism if we want to move forward. So the idea that corporations should not be a priority of the planet, and that humanity should be served as the primary function, of society, is one that seems pretty obvious to me, and pretty obvious that it should be for anyone. Humanity should be favoured over corporations because we're all humans, and thus the benefit to one of us should be the benefit of all of us. So I say strongly agree with that, because you should be hopefully believing that humanity is more important than the arbitrary corporations. I'm not a massive fan of the idea of TNCs to begin with. There's nothing wrong with people banding together to organize, but that should be worker-led. It shouldn't be private. It should be owned by all of us, because society isn't that sort of thing where we need a privately run organization or body. We can have the workers own that, because the workers of one doing the labor to make it possible works for people who are in society, and no labor is truly independent of other labor. So the idea that corporations should exist as this entity controlled by a few people over everyone is a pretty poor one, in my opinion. So yeah, strongly agree. Next one. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. This is another pretty easy one, in my opinion. Strongly disagree. The idea that you just blindly go with something simply because you were born there is so absurd that it should be pretty easy to see why this is wrong. Like my country, the UK, for instance, went to war in Iraq. Like that's a awful thing to do. War crimes galore. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair, he should be clearly serving on some sort of trial or being arrested for his involvement in what was essentially war crimes, going to war in Iraq with George Bush, looking for weapons that didn't exist. And the actions over there, if anyone's heard of Abu Ghraib, you can see there's clearly something messed up there with the direction of the UK and the US. But if this question was something I agreed with, I would just be going along with that simply because my country agreed. The idea we should attach ourselves to nations as a whole, and move in the direction that our country wants us to, simply because we're from that country, is so flawed and awful. I think that we should be moving away from that. People aren't defined by where they're born; they're defined by who they are. And when you start playing into the idea that these arbitrary borders matter more than the character that a person has, we allow ourselves to play into the hands of right-wing or far-right rhetoric. And certainly in my case, the UK, the British Empire, it was awful. this awful colonialist imperialist regime that went around exploiting the world and world's nations simply for more wealth and bettering itself at the exploitation and misery of many nations around the world. But would I go along with it simply because it's my nation? No, of course not. People need to remove themselves from the idea that they belong or their identity is crafted around a nation and start thinking in terms of people and workers rather than nations themselves. Anyway, next one. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it is foolish to be proud of it. Again, that's another one I strongly agree with. I pretty much covered that in the last one. The idea that you should be proud of something you had no control over and something as arbitrary as where you were born is silly, in my opinion. Especially when, again, as that last question sort of showed, plenty of nations are pretty heavily flawed. The UK and its history of colonialism and imperialism and the numerous things it does wrong. Americans, for instance, their country is a horrid regime that goes around enforcing capitalism on the rest of the world. Why would anyone be proud of a nation like that? If it was just, an entity, then you would be negatively judging that. But because it's where you're born, you're supposed to have loyalty to it. That's ridiculous. You shouldn't be in favour of a nation simply because you were born there. It's absurd. So strongly agree. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. I strongly disagree. I mean, this should be a fairly obvious answer. Race is, of course, a social construct. The idea of race came around because people wanted to commodify black people originally. Originally, you didn't have race, and it was not seen as a major difference any more so than perhaps the colour of hair or just another body feature. It's only recent human history, and when I say recent, I don't mean like last few years. I mean like in terms of the entire existence of Homo sapiens, that we've seen race as a difference point. So no, this is a pretty easy one to dismiss. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Another pretty easy phrase. Strongly disagree. This is like playground stuff, essentially. The idea that you should be aligned with someone simply because they dislike someone you also dislike is absurd. For instance, I dislike Nazis, and so does Joseph Stalin. Would Joseph Stalin and I be friends? Like, of course not. But according to this motto, it's that's what I'd be doing. Similarly, you could say that Trump is an enemy of someone I would dislike, and Hillary Clinton also dislikes Trump. And there's no way I'd find myself aligning myself with Hillary Clinton, this awful neoliberal capitalist who goes around putting war crimes upon the world. It's a disgrace. So no, this saying is pretty easily shown to be wrong. You can literally just go to a school playground and look at a school bully, and then would you be friends with another bully who happens to bully them? They still bully you, they still bully everyone else, but they're bullying the bully you previously had. So are they your friends now? Like, of course not. It's a easy thing that gets sort of taken apart on kids shows, let alone as a political idea. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Strongly disagree. Now, whilst I'm semi-critical of the idea of nations as a whole, and certainly of the idea that there needs to be a hierarchy system that would govern nations, whilst we have nations, there is international law. And the idea that you can just justify breaking an international code of conduct simply to meet your own whims is pretty horrific, to be honest. I mean, again, that's where you get people like George Bush and Tony Blair thinking that it's okay to invade an entire region. It's why you get so many nations that have been victims to US imperialism, because they've seen capitalism and sort of spreading capitalism is justified, and thus stomped over the rights and sovereignty of the nation that they've invaded, like Chile, where they backed a fascist coup, like El Salvador, Guatemala, where they again overthrew a democratically elected government to impose a more US-friendly regime. And it's dangerous, really, because when you have a law that you're willing to break simply for your own justifications, you hand power to people to act however they want to act, really. without disregarding the rights and sovereignty of other people. So no, of course, this one is something I strongly disagree with. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I would say I agree with this one. I think information needs to be clear. You should be able to look at the world and have facts for a lot of things. Like you should be able to say, "Oh, how has this policy affected these people? How are this government fixing people's lives?" And the fact that so many people are dedicated to selling stories and individual little snippets of information as part of a wider narrative rather than let you read the whole proper thing is pretty scary, in my opinion. It's how you see people, despite having facts shown to them, still believe that Trump does the things he says. It's how people can, believe that politics is confined to a Democrat-Republican scale when there's so much more to the left of this little modicum of the political spectrum. Entertainment, whilst important, should not be mixed together as readily as information. And whilst I do think that it's important to be inclusive of what you're doing with your information, it's silly to package it as part of some entertainment marketplace because it can lead to pretty disastrous effects. Anyway, that's page 1 done. Now, the economy. We're talking about attitudes here, not the FTSE index. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. It should be fairly obvious as to what I'm going to answer here. Strongly agree. Obviously, class is something that you can measure and observe, whereas nationality is a sort of a thing put onto us without any choice. Well, it's class to a degree, but nationality doesn't discriminate between the workers of the world being subjected to the conditions of capitalism. And indeed, capitalism forces workers into a situation where they have to sell their labor to the capitalist class or risk not having a home, not having food, not being able to survive. And so absolutely, class is something that we can all address over nationality, which doesn't really matter because our experiences under capitalism are pretty similar. So yeah, an easy one there. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Ooh, interesting question. I think that unemployment, is under a capitalist worldview where you need to sell your labor hours to survive. It's more important to be controlling unemployment, to making sure everyone has a means of having an income. However, this is a slightly flawed question because inflation is another one to think about, because obviously inflation affects everyone. If your products are rising in value and your wages aren't, you're going to be in a pretty shifty, rubbish position. So whilst I do agree that unemployment is more important than inflation, you want people in jobs, but other than necessarily. Actually, you want me to start up and muddle this up. Controlling inflation is more important, because you want to be in the situation where people can afford their means of surviving and stuff. But this question, again, I find it somewhat flawed because it doesn't really address the overlying issue, which is capitalism. People would have the means to goods and access if it wasn't put behind a paywall and owned privately by a landlord or a landowner or a capitalist corporation putting a price on a essential commodity like water or education or transportation and stuff. And unemployment is a major issue because you need to sell your labor hours under capitalism if you want to have the means to access to the essential commodities and essential goods. So whilst I do think inflation probably edges it in over unemployment, it's a flawed question. I feel there's no analysis beyond just the two axes you presented here, the compass presented here. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Strongly agree. It's pretty obvious that you don't want your corporations acting without regulation if you do have capitalism, because um, you know they're not going to value the environment if they're acting for their profit's sake, which they ultimately all do. I mean, your arguments of, oh, it's bad for the environment if you're just dumping your waste without properly treating it, is going to be shouted down by the other person who's saying, well, if you put all this money and resource into adequately dealing with the waste and adequately making our processes environmentally friendly, you're going to have less profits. You're going to make less money. You're going to have less to give to your shareholders, and subsequently, the environment is binned off in response in return for higher profits. You look at the fact that Antarctica is being targeted by corporations because of the oil underneath it. They don't care that it's going to have a massive effect on the environment of the South Pole and of global sea levels and temperature of the world and stuff. But it's going to make them money, and that's ultimately what matters under capitalism. If you can make profit, if you can accrue more capital by profiting off commodities, you're set. So relying on corporations to protect themselves, protect the environment themselves, is ridiculous. Though, yeah, again, I don't think corporations should really exist in the first place. Workers should own the means of production, and subsequently, the idea that corporations should have this license to exist in the first place is pretty flawed, in my opinion. But in the means of this question, yeah, no, they should absolutely be regulated. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. Strongly agree. Karl Marx is a legend. No, but it's pretty obvious. People should be able to function in society, live in society, without being placed under the capitalist system. They should be able to contribute to society what they can contribute and get, what they need, even. And that way you have a society in which everyone contributes something, everyone has worth and value, and everyone as a human being is able to live a life of healthiness and potentially happiness. And no longer are you seeing people having to starve because they don't add anything to someone else's position on the free market. So it's a pretty basic one, I think, that everyone should be behind, because you want everyone to be at least eating well and having a home and not starving. And when we have the means to do that, but not a system that distributes things fairly and has people suffering for no other reason than people don't want to lose their stolen profits, that's wrong. So that's ultimately what I think in that regards. It's a good, a pretty good idea. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Absolutely. I mean, the idea that a crucial item like water, something we all need to hydrate ourselves, can be turned into a commodity, sold at a profit, barred from usage unless you pay a capitalist to buy it, is disgraceful. And the fact that you look at the situation in Flint, where thousands of people have no access to clean drinking water and have to get it from bottles, that's because of capitalism, where someone looked at a system and thought, let's cut back the safety and the ethical nature of it in order to make more profits. And that's what happens when you have a system that is run on the profiting of commodities. You're always going to see drinking water, good food, clean air, all these things that are properly important to life are going to be thrown out the window for more profit. So yeah, it's terrible that something like that is a consumer product, because it says of the world that we view profit and commodities, profiting off commodities even, as more important than human life. And really, that's something that should disgust anyone that really thinks about society. So yeah, absolutely. The fact that someone can put a claim on something as simple as water is pretty sad. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Strongly agree. Land has no true owners. Land should be owned by everyone. And the idea that someone can just say, oh, I own the land and it's my land, is disgusting. Again, people with wealth buying up colossal amounts of land and then forcing other people to then sort of live off the land and pay rent to a landowner, or cram into like small housing or no housing at all, so that a rich landowner can own vast portions of a region, is again disgusting and repugnant. Land is no commodity, and that should be pretty obvious, really. I don't think that it's good and necessary for one person or a small group of people to control vast amounts of land. There's no need for it. Everyone should be able to live comfortably, and like have decent living areas for themselves. There's enough land on the planet for it. We've got plenty of space, but it's distributed so poorly that we're seeing problems with homelessness and with overcrowdedness, when we have free homes, empty homes, just sat there unused simply because no one can afford to pay the rent. And that's disgraceful. That just shows how morally bankrupt capitalist society is. So really, if you disagree with the idea that land isn't something which should be bought and sold, then what does that say about you as a person? It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Strongly agree. Now, again, I am an anti-capitalist. I believe profit is theft. You're essentially taking the labour of others and then profiting off it by adding value, thus stealing from the labour that was crucial to the process of creating that product. And subsequently, the idea that someone can just manipulate wealth in this way and do very little to help other people in society, but then attain massive fortunes off it, is disgraceful. That's about a lot, but it's the case here. You see all these right-wing people criticize people on welfare for supposedly doing nothing, and yet there are these people who essentially are born rich, do very little to help society or benefit society in any way, and then they end up even richer by the end of their lives and provide no service to the majority of people, bar themselves and maybe their family. And for what? For essentially their own benefit. And what have they done to better anyone else's lives? Now, I will say that I don't think people need to exist for everyone else. People should be free to do as they wish, but it shouldn't come at the expense of others. And if you have a fortune, it has naturally come through the exploitative and unfair capitalist system. So no, not only should no one have a personal fortune in comparison to anyone else, people shouldn't. If you're doing this role of manipulating money, then no, you shouldn't have that personal fortune. But I will say that wealth should not be something that is privately owned. You shouldn't be able to profit off the labor of others to attain your wealth, and as that's how you get wealthy. The wealthy, rich class, the upper class, should not exist as a whole. Protectionism is something necessary in trade. Strongly disagree. Protectionism is something that is a weapon of capitalism, a way of forcing other nations to adhere to your standards of capitalism and regulation, or lose out on income through trade. You see America do this a lot with less capitalist country, less deregulated markets. So, for instance, Ghana refused to privatize a lot of its land. It was owned by the state, and thus the money was coming back into the state directly. Subsequently, the US blocked trade to Ghana, cut its funding from the World Bank, cut it from the IMF, got it through the UN, obviously, because they have veto power in the UN. And Ghana entered an economic crisis and famine, and eventually were forced into privatizing large areas of their land. The extreme end of this is where you see nations like El Salvador and Guatemala only have sanctions placed on them, but then eventually, through policies like protectionism, justified in backing coups and backing blockages with, backing right-wing overthrows of democratically elected governments, simply because of their need to enforce capitalism across the world. Protectionism is something which really boils down to the fact that nations should not preside over the well-being of workers, and there shouldn't really be nations in the first place. But the idea that nations should just trade based on enforcing their own standards is pretty poor, in my opinion, and there's no need to worsen the effect of other workers around the world through policies that affect your own, only your own even. But again, it's a question that I think lacks a lot of nuance in regards to the idea of nations and whether they should exist or not, really. Anyway, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Strongly disagree. As I've already said, profit comes from the exploitation of labor. You can't profit off something without worsening the labor of others to make that profit. You take that surplus value from adding it to the produce and thus bettering yourself off the labor of others. So the idea that this profit is at all fair and necessary for these shareholders is a sham. It's essentially taking the labor of others and stealing it, stealing the value produced from it. Even the company would not exist without the workers who did the labor. Yeah, the produce and benefits of that labor is going to your shareholders. That's gross. That's essentially theft. And the idea that a company has no other role than to do this and to steal from its workers is just a complete sham. As I said, workers should own and control production in society because they are the ones doing labor. And as labor and workers encompasses everyone, there should not be a tier of people in society that essentially do nothing but consume capital, increase capital for themselves, and then leech off the work of others. So yeah, strongly disagree with that. The rich are too highly taxed. Strongly disagree. Not only should the rich not exist as a whole, as I just mentioned, the profit system is theft of labor value, but the idea that wealthy people are taxed too much is absurd. You don't need a massive mansion and massive amounts of land. Like for what purpose? You've got enough. And if we're going to have capitalism, we need to make sure people at the bottom are getting a welfare system that works, that gives them basic means of survival. And that's not the case. I mean, you look at the UK where people are having to miss meals and not heat their homes properly and miss out on basic elements of a healthy life to get by because the system has no actual funds or no proper funds to address, to help them at all. Meanwhile, you see wealthy members of society having billions. We don't need, because what do you need? What do you actually have to spend money on at that point? Like, there's a difference between living well and keeping yourself insulated and keeping yourself absurdly wealthy when you're not even spending the money you've got. Like, what's the point of that? You're actively causing people to suffer by just hoarding money for yourself for no reason other than like what, a number by your name. But again, my lack of support for capitalism makes it pretty clear that I don't actually believe there should be a wealthy class, because their profits are produced and their wealth is produced from the labor of others. You can't be wealthy through your own means without depending on the labor of others. So whilst I don't think people who are rich should exist, if they are to exist, and whilst they do exist, there should be massive efforts to tax and redistribute wealth, because it's absurd that people should suffer simply because someone else at the top of the food chain profited from their labor. Those with the ability to pay should have higher standards. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Strongly disagree. A free market is not free for anyone but those who have the wealth to pay. The idea that you should be priced out of your own life simply because a doctor refused to give you life-saving treatment unless you paid for it is, disgusting. It shows that you care more about profits for corporations and the wealthy few than you do the well-being of other human beings. And if you can see why that's a bad idea, you should be able to see why capitalism as a whole is a pretty disgusting idea, because it essentially puts a price on important, crucial elements of life and demands you pay a business owner or landowner to have that commodity, despite them not having no legitimate claim to owning that portion of society. But no, healthcare is something we all need in some form or another. Some people need it more urgently and in different, more direct forms. Others won't really be in a hospital much beyond their own birth and maybe the odd vaccination and stuff. But we all benefit from it. We all need other people to benefit from it. And frankly, we should all want other people to be well and have access to healthcare. And we can even see that putting a profit incentive in healthcare, or indeed any market, actually negatively affects that region. You see areas of medical care being defunded and thus not properly addressed because there's no profit to be made of it. You see illnesses and antibiotics that could help address those illnesses being held back because it will make people not need the healthcare so much and not have to pay them so much. Putting a profit margin on healthcare, or indeed any commodity that is essential to one's living, is disgusting because it puts a price on people's lives. And you see in America where people regularly die because they couldn't afford their healthcare or avoid getting treatment because they couldn't afford to go to hospital, couldn't even afford the ambulance to get to the hospital. It's gross. And if you agree with this question, with this statement even, it's just not, you're not a nice person, essentially. Government should penalise businesses that mislead the public. Strongly agree. Like I've already said a few times, the idea that businesses should be private in the whole is a bad one. But certainly, if you're misleading your customers and you're being unethical for your practices, then yeah, you should be penalised. So whether a government should exist is another question. My personal answer is no. But if we exist in the current situation of society, then yeah. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Yes, definitely. The idea, I mean, you only have to look at the state of many industries in America to see what happens when you let monopolies form. If you want freedom and you want the ability for people to cope in society, you need to remove the ability for people to control vast entities of land, like you see with television, for instance, in America, where there's 5 major companies, and if you don't pay one of them, you don't have a TV license. You miss out on all of that content you could be enjoying. It gets even worse when you think about it in terms of a more crucial commodity like food and water, like in Flint, for instance, in Michigan, where they didn't have that choice of picking a different service or improving their system because it's all owned by the same people. Monopolies essentially allow a few people to control the welfare and well-being of everyone else under their control of that commodity, and subsequently their lives are dependent on the profits of that one person, that one multinational. Again, I don't believe in the free market as a whole. There shouldn't be a capitalist system of economy. But if we have this system, then we need restrictions, we need regulations. Even, you can disagree with capitalism, and I do, but if we do have capitalism, we need to regulate it. We can't have it, and we need left-wing amendments to it. So I strongly agree. The free of the market, the free of the people. Like, grow up about hearing that statement. A free market does not equate to free people. You're free if you have the wealth to be free, which most people don't. Again, if you put a price on anything, if you make anything a commodity under the rules of capitalism, you end up with a situation where workers are having to sell their labor as a commodity and let the capitalists profit off them in return for basic commodities like water, food, a home which they can't even outright buy. They have to rent it, and they're never obviously going to have what they put into the system given back to them. They're not going to have that fair self-dependent wage. So the idea that you're free under free market capitalism is a sham, really, because the only people who are going to ever have the wealth to be free are the capitalist class themselves, the wealthiest in society. Hence, workers are sort of forced into their jobs. Because if you ask people in any capitalist economy, do you enjoy your job? Do you have enough time in the day to do what as you wish? Do you think society is fair? You're going to get no back, because there's people stuck in the same jobs for years, decades even, and they can't ever do anything about it because the fear of death and losing out into capitalism is too much. You can't oppose that. So I strongly disagree there. And we are done with page 2. Now, a look at some of your personal social values. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Good Lord. Yeah, no. I mean, firstly, abortion can be undertaken by anyone, not just a woman. But secondly, abortion is a matter of personal autonomy. The only person who gets to decide whether you have an abortion is you, your own body. So, your own decision. And if it doesn't concern, it's not your body, then keep quiet, because it doesn't matter what you have to say about it. All authority should be questioned. There shouldn't be authority. I'm not talking about, authority in the sense of intelligence, or in the sense of learning as such. Like, you want to be listening to your the person who knows about science over the person who doesn't, the person who knows about chemicals over the person who doesn't. But in terms of government and in hierarchy, then yeah, absolutely, there shouldn't be authority. And if there is, it should absolutely be questioned, because the answer you should be getting from the end of your questioning process is no, this authority does not have the legitimate grounds to exist. So yeah, strongly agree. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Yeah, no. A society of punishment and retribution in this sense is just one that's pretty awful. For the umpteenth time. But yeah, strongly disagree. Again, this is something that you can see tackled in primary schools and for infants, basically. The idea that 2 wrongs make a right. Like, if you see someone wrong someone, it's not good to just go out thinking vengeance, because that's not a healthy mentality to have. And people don't learn that way in many cases. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theatres or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Absolutely disagree. The idea that art should be determined by a free market is one that ultimately ends up in the curtailing and decline of art itself. You want people being able to enjoy their relative field, and it shouldn't come down to whether a business was able to profit of it. It shouldn't come down to whether the free market made it successful. Certainly, when it's something like theatres and museums where they're enriching themselves in history and culture, it's pretty horrific to imagine it all being shut down because some billionaire couldn't increase profits for their shareholders. That's horrifying. Again, we can look at this from a more broader perspective. Capitalism should not be pricing out ideas and value and art as a whole. People should be able to enjoy and do as they please in society. And going back to what was said in a question earlier on this, if people were truly free, then they wouldn't have to worry about making profits for their interests to survive. People aren't able to indulge in their ideas because capitalism is more interested in profits than education or hobbies or leisure. And the idea that a museum should have to charge people to enter to make profits and thus survive is pretty great. You're essentially pricing people out of learning about the world, which incidentally is something capitalists like to do, because an uneducated populace is one that is more likely to remain under submission. So no, I strongly disagree with that. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Strongly disagree. You want a strong education system to ensure your students know about the world and the dangers of homeschooling and of keeping people away from a school environment is evident when you see the amount of people in America who believe the Earth is flat and literally believe that the Klan had the right idea and stuff, and other like kooky ideas about the planet and stuff. But certainly you don't want to be having people away from proper regulated education. I will say that schools need reform, certainly, and that's part of the whole problem. Capitalism forms a society with major problems in it. But no, there should be. I do think that educating the youth is important. Um, all people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep their own kind. Strongly disagree. This is just basic stuff, isn't it? Difference is good. You don't want a society of people who are all exactly the same. And it doesn't really matter whether what you want or not. People should have the freedom to act as they wish and as they do. And it doesn't matter what you are. It should be who you are that makes you decide who you want to be around. Anyway, I just don't need to dwell on that question. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Strongly disagree. You don't need to hit or strike your children. You don't need to be violent towards kids like that. There's always a way of speaking and educating your children without being violent towards them, and certainly teaching children that the means to get them to listen is through violence and abuse makes for unhealthy minds at a later stage. And it's just not right. You shouldn't be hitting young people like that. It's just, the idea of striking a child is pretty gross, pretty horrifying, really. Like, the people who answer yes to this question, would you hit a child? No. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Strongly agree. Like, that you're an autonomous being. You don't have to tell your parents everything. Like, and secrets are natural. You've got stuff you want to trust with your friends rather than like a close family member. Yeah, absolutely. The thing, marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offence. Strongly agree. You want to smoke weed? Then yeah, smoke it. The prime function of schooling should be equip a future generation to find jobs. Strongly disagree. This is a very capitalist idea. The idea that your primary function in life from your youth should be to make profit for your boss. Absolutely, no. You need to be in a position in society where you have the freedom to choose. This entire statement goes against what earlier was said about the free market being free for people. You're essentially making people training into finding a role that makes the most profit for a corporation. You're infringing on their freedom from the very start. You're saying, no, you can't pursue your interest in drama or art or music because they're not very likely to make us profit. Instead, go into this exact area or go into low paid work. Otherwise, we're not interested because you won't make our shareholders more capital at the end of the day. That is just everything that's wrong with society. That whole capitalist idea of education just for means to make more profit. So no, absolutely disagree with that. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. So this question is essentially, are you a Nazi, yes or no? The idea that you can just block people off from access to basic parts of humanity like reproduction is pretty heavily coded in eugenics, and I hope anyone who answers anything but strongly disagree to this question is rethinking their life. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Strongly disagree. Again, this sort of goes against the idea of freedom, doesn't it? You want children to be able to be themselves, to learn the ways of the world, but also just express yourself how you want to be. Be your own person and be someone who is good in your own way. And it doesn't matter whether it shouldn't be the authority telling you, or be X, Y, Z. Be able to be all the letters and all the numbers and anything you want to be, really. So yeah, strongly disagree. Children shouldn't be told, "Oh, this is how you act," because we say so. That's just antithetical to how you want a society to be, in my opinion. There are no savage and civilized peoples, but are only different cultures. Strongly agree. People are born and raised in different environments, and to to suggest we have some sort of superior society simply because we're from this society is silly. You look at people who like to say racist things about Africa, and it comes from this idea that their culture, the Western culture, is somehow superior, and it ignores the fact that people have different experiences and different ideas about what they want, and posting some ulterior ideas about what is the best way to run a society is, pretty supremacist, pretty rubbish to do. So no, not at all. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. Strongly disagree. People should be able to exist in society without selling their labor hours to a capitalist. This idea that you are only worthy whether if you're working, and subsequently the coded message is that you're only worthy if you give your labor to a capitalist to profit off and then give you back a fraction of, is again gross, disgusting, upon whatever adjective you want to put in front of it. We are in a position in society where we are automating many of the roles previously done by actual humans. So what once took 1,000 workers on a dockyard can be done by one or two machines with one person overseeing it, if that. We're at a point where we don't need everyone to have a job. In fact, most people won't even need a job in coming years because we've got machines that can do it better. So the idea that this would even make sense, that working is mandatory for a place in society, is wrong even just by looking at society. But we should have enough compassion and empathy and pleasantries about each other to realize that humans don't need to work to be valuable. Everyone has value. Everyone is worthy of a place in society, regardless of how much you do or don't do. And people are valuable in different ways. Like a sports person might be really good athletically, but someone else, a more academic person, someone who's better at maths might be better. Then there's also some people who are good at writing, who are also, they've got their own contribution. And even if you don't have excellence in all those areas, you should still be able to live a comfortable life. And you'd be able to, eat, have a home, drink, participate, do as you wish. There's enough resources and capability for society to accommodate for everyone. And indeed, everyone has something they can potentially find to make themselves happy. And in a society where everyone, as part of society, is entitled to part of society, that they've got that opportunities. We like to cast people who don't work as lazy, and that's simply not the case. That's just the idea that you're bad if you don't give profit to your boss. That is where that stems from, and we need to remove this misconception about life because it's pretty bad. Essentially, it's pretty negative for how we view our fellow humans. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Strongly disagree. I think that we need to address issues and problems in society, be they small ones or large ones. So, for instance, you see a lot of people say that people on the left are always moaning and always unhappy, and that's because society is a pretty unhappy, bleak place a lot of the time. Portraying Western society and the world at large as some sort of paradise where we've solved most of the problems and it's just a few bad eggs making things wrong, is to ignore the very nature of why society has problems in the first place, to ignore the millions of people suffering under capitalism, to ignore the many nations that have been ruined and devastated by the foreign policies of capitalist nations like America in Latin America, like European nations in Africa. We need to address problems in the world to make our world better for everyone. And ignoring problems isn't a good idea, even on a small level. Like for a short-term degree, maybe you want to be ignoring some problems, but ultimately, it's better to identify and analyze them, in my opinion. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Strongly disagree. My grandparents on my mum's side are from the Caribbean, and I wouldn't be here without them. So, firstly, this is just on a personal level wrong. But secondly, we shouldn't define ourselves by nations. It's simply what happens if someone moved from place A to place B. Like, there's no necessary criteria to fit into a nation of people when your nation exists of what? Just a line drawn in on a map. There's no biological difference. There's no real difference. It's just you came from place A instead of place B. You look at Europe, and really, it's not that. It's not like people are separated by their nations. It's quite a flowing, mixed place. You look at Belgium, where it's you could walk from say Paris to Brussels, and it's not clear if you didn't have a map. You might not be able to work out where France ended and Belgium started. You look at Nordic countries; it's quite a mix. It's a blend. countries and the world itself are more complex than just, you know, an arbitrary measure of whether you're from that country or not. And really, we need to be moving away from the idea that we're defined by the nations we are from, and instead looking at how we are as people. Certainly, my experience on the internet connected to the world shows that you know, people don't really define themselves as from a nation; they're just people. So, no, I strongly disagree with that. What's good for most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Yeah, strongly disagree. The idea that some billionaire raking in profits stolen from their workers who work in sweatshops, like in Nike, for instance, it's just a complete like mystery, isn't it? You mean you look at the corporations that make the most money, which have the most capital, and it's always come through maximizing profits off commodities. So through not caring about the environmental sustainability of the planet, not caring about the workers they've forced into cheap labor jobs in mines in parts of sub-Saharan Africa or in sweatshops in Southeast Asia. It's through bypassing any regulation where they could, and even the ones that have been passed. It's by getting your nation to invade another nation and then put your privatized farms everywhere, like in Latin America, where American nations do that regularly. This idea that corporations being rich help society is a complete sham, because what ends up happening is you have a tier of people at the very summit of society being well off, and then the rest suffering, like we see in the capitalism today, where lots of people are struggling to get by every day, while people at the top doing nothing but profiting off the labor of others are fine. So no, this is a complete lie. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Strongly disagree. I think that again, you know, you want people to have information they can rely on. And whilst I do think that again, states are a flawed concept, we shouldn't really have a state. The role of institutions that can, you know, benefit everyone is better than one that's private, like in America, where you have industries like Fox News with massively wealthy backers dominate the market because of their extreme wealth, and thus influence people with incorrect and often outright dangerous opinions and news in quotation marks into, you know, buying their ideas. Like all the major news networks in America have a capitalist right-wing leaning, and yeah, some are worse than others, and some you would position more towards the Democrats, but they're still that corporate, untrue presence. They're still pretty poor at delivering quality news because, you know, they've got that private problem. So yeah, you want if you have a state, you want independent public service that can be used by the public for the public. Page 4, how you see the wider society. So in theory, this is the halfway point. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counter-terrorism. Strongly agree. The idea, so you look at the number of snooping bills that have been introduced in recent years in many Western nations, the idea that your government can spy on you to somehow protect you from a terror threat that really isn't that big. You've got more chance of like falling out of bed and killing yourself than you have of being killed in a terror attack. And indeed, the terror attacks you're more likely to be killed from are from, you know, right-wing, far-right even terrorist attacks, like in America, where, you know, people get shot more in school shootings than they do in terrorist attacks from the Middle East. In fact, when we speak about terrorism, we immediately sort of think of Middle Eastern terrorism and, you know, Muslims doing the terror attacks, when in reality it's not the case. And Muslims are actually the victims of terror attacks more in the Middle East than they are the perpetrators of the terror attacks in the West. But yeah, going back to the point, civil liberties, the idea that, you know, people have rights that should be upheld, are being curbed to protect, in quotation marks, the West from terrorism. Certainly. I mean, you look at the situation in Indonesia now, where, you know, there's some pretty audacious curbings of human liberties to supposedly protect the state. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with this. Sorry, right. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. Yeah, great advantage. I mean, if you're what you're essentially arguing here is if you don't have anyone to disagree with, you don't have arguments. So it's like you've removed the problem by removing any element for A even to B disagreement. So yeah, strongly disagree. Be pretty easy. You're essentially saying democracy is bad because sometimes people disagree. So yeah, no. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. The amount of subjective areas here should pretty much alert you straight away to why this is a pretty bad idea. Like, what do you define as wrong? Pretty recently, certainly in America, being gay was considered wrong. You weren't allowed to be gay or get married to someone of the same gender to yourself. Um, is that something that should be deemed wrong to be surveilled? Surveilled, not surveillance. What's the verb? So watched over, observed. There we go. I just changed the verb. Yeah, like wrongness, if you leave it to the state to determine, can be pretty dangerous. I mean, look at what happens in certain nations where, based on the morality and ideas of the state, you can be imprisoned for stuff that's pretty arbitrary and you'd see as pretty horrific, like LGBT plus stuff, for instance. So no, this is ridiculous to suggest that spying on people is okay if because only bad people will be spied on. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious of crimes. Strongly disagree. People shouldn't be killed really for um, for what crimes. We should be aiming to reform rather than punish as such. And if you'd find if we sort of remove the conditions that create problems, for instance, so you look at economic crime, and a large proportion of that is due to capitalism. People trying to survive capitalism by bypassing laws and simply failing because they got caught or they're not high profile enough to get away with it. So no, I don't agree with the death penalty. We shouldn't be executing our civilians because that's just not what we should be aiming to do. We should be aiming to reform people. And it says serious crimes here, and yeah, you can imagine people are angry and vicious and rightfully annoyed and upset by the existence of people supposedly living comfortable lives who've done the most heinous acts. But we should still be aiming to, use therapy and stuff and treatment to address that. We shouldn't. We're not saying we condone these crimes and we condone pedophilia and rape and stuff. Of course not. That's not what people say when we say we don't agree with the death penalty. But we should be aiming to sort of rehabilitate them and speak to them rather than just have this death if you are XYZ. Because ultimately you improve society more through addressing problems rather than just trying to kill anyone who happens to be that. So you're not going to get rid of the problem by that way. As you pretty easily see with states that have death penalty not addressing their issues with that, in America at least. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. No, yeah, no. I've already mentioned that I oppose the idea of hierarchy as a whole. But the idea that people need an inherent structure of order where people need someone at the top to tell you what to do is absurd. You don't need hierarchy for a society to function. And indeed, working together is better than someone telling everyone what to do. Everyone's opinion should be accounted for. Everyone's place in society should be accounted for. We shouldn't be having a situation where individuals at the summit of society can do as they wish, and everyone else has to follow their lead simply because they're in charge. There's no logic or ethical, stance behind that. So yeah, I agree. I disagree with that. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Well, this is just easily dismissed, isn't it? Because what you define as art can be anything. Art is simply the expression of ideas and stuff. And if it's abstract, to say this, then if it's abstract and you can't understand it, doesn't mean that it's not art. Doesn't mean that you can't call it art simply because you didn't understand it. That's ridiculous. That's like saying someone, "Oh, this music is bad because I don't personally see it as nice for my taste." Like you wouldn't say, "Oh, Nickelback is not art," simply because you didn't like Nickelback. It's still art. You just don't happen to like it. And similarly, I don't get the sort of outrage you see over people who like put a painting up that doesn't really look like anything. But that's just your perception. And yeah, you might not like it, but it ends there. It's still art, and it's not up to you to decide whether it's not art. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. No. If you allow punishment just to be your sort of theme of the justice system, then you allow for corruption of the idea of justice to set in pretty quickly. Already under capitalism, you see prisons being used as a means of profit, where prisoners are just essentially workers, you don't have to pay much or at all, and to naturally maximize profits, which is why private prisons have been such a useful tool of capitalism, because they're a way of making your labor a commodity you have to spend even less on and thus make more money on at the other end. But no, we shouldn't be looking at society and saying we need to take you out because you need punished. You need to be put in a situation where you're suffering. No, that's the wrong thing to have for society. We should be looking at improving our society for everyone, and thus rehabilitating people who have done wrong onto others, rather than so that we don't make the same mistakes again. And if you removed capitalism, if you removed the system that makes people have to steal and commit put like economic crime to try and get by, you'd reduce the amount of people in prisons massively, and subsequently end up with a system where people in sort of a justice situation where they need a court to sort of sort things out have the ability to be worked on by like a therapist or a psychologist or someone who can help them come to terms with their issue instead of just locking them away, throwing away the key, and doing nothing, and having this massive population of people in prison doing nothing but just sitting there and being quote unquote punished when they're really just doing nothing. So no, rehabilitation is more important than punishment. So I strongly disagree. It is a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals. Strongly disagree. Again, people are never a complete waste, and whilst I do think it can be really tiring, we have to consider the context of today's society is one where money is not available in the sense that you don't have resources to be pouring into individuals. So it can be easy to disregard some people based on the fact that you've been trying for a long time. But if you free up the amount of time and resources dedicated to imprisoning people who shouldn't really be there, who essentially got there because they either couldn't pay their bail or tried to better their life by stealing, who would only be there, who aren't there, who are there because of the conditions capitalism creates. You could have more resources allocated to trying to rehabilitate some criminals. So yeah, whilst it's easy to say, oh, someone's too far gone under the current system, we can always improve things at a later point in time. And we can have a situation where we can adequately address the problems people have. Yeah, these last few questions, I think, point out that we need more and a more nuanced approach to dealing with the problems in society than just stay in prison forever. The business person and manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Absolutely not. The idea that again, this is another idea rooted in right-wing ideas about society. You only need the manufacturer and the business person because they own the means of production. You essentially have to sell your product to them and sell your labor to them for them to profit off if you want to get by. And sure, you can try and compete with them independently, and you can try and release your own, I don't know, say, video game or piece of music, but you're never going to get by because you don't have that power and wealth and capital to enforce yourself onto the market. So, for instance, I could, if I wanted to, make a football game. I could buy the tools. Maybe not buy all the tools because it's quite expensive to have game developing software. But I could try and make my product. But the fact that these massive corporations are people I'm competing with makes it pretty obvious pretty quickly that I'm not going to be able to do anything. because I've not got the licenses to the players. I've not got the money to fund a proper um, video game development cycle. I've not got the licensing for the actual like game to be released on any console that anyone plays. My video game gets shot down within like seconds of me conceptualizing it because I've not got the power and capital that the manufacturers and owners of means of production have. So I am forced into signing up or joining the business person and manufacturer, where my ideas are either quashed by corporate goals, or if I do have ideas, they are molded heavily by profits. So you look at Hideo Kojima, for instance, who had to leave Konami because his creative license being crushed by Konami's drive for profit. You look at what Metal Gear is now. Before it was this like amazing franchise, which like everyone has like really good memories of. A lot of people do anyway. And now it's a typical like zombie shooter. It could be like what about 10 other games. If you just saw it and didn't know it was Metal Gear, then what would you think of it? It's nothing. It's just your bog standard game. That's just one example. The idea that you need a capitalist for your work to be successful, it's a complete capitalist lie. It's something that comes from capitalism to make capitalism seem like a necessary system, when in fact it's not. If the artist owned their own produce, if they were able to exist in society without needing a parasite to like produce themselves, they could do their own work. They could like write something and know that no, I don't have to give away part of my product and let myself be exploited to get my work out there. To be on a platform where you don't need a massive corporate entity to survive. And thus, your idea, if it was a good book or a good piece of work and people liked it, it could just go to the top naturally. You look at all the indie games and like indie songs and musicians who aren't as massively commercial but are really popular with their respective fan bases, who sadly can't rely on the industry they're clearly valuable in, because they don't have that corporate entity behind them. They don't have that. They don't participate in directly profiting or producing profits for the corporate overlords, the people with the capital to be a manufacturer or a business person. So this question is clearly grafted of capitalist nature, and subsequently needs to be disagreed with in order to recognize the value of those who are creating art over those who latch themselves onto industries and then demand artists sign with them to even compete. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Yeah, I strongly disagree. If you agree with this, you just like get back to the 1700s, like flipping it. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Strongly agree. This is natural in capitalism, where unethical exploitation is pretty much the basis of the whole system. Corporations and indeed capitalism as a whole, it seeks to profit off commodities to accrue more capital. And if you see anything as a potential source of profit, then you do not care for the sovereignty and rights of other people, because you're just getting profits. So corporations that, for instance, go to the Far East Asia and force workers into like minimal wages, barely livable wages, living off a situation where they're completely dependent on the corporation for any sort of survival, because they're the only employer around, is completely unethical. But it's capitalism. It's part of making profit. I mentioned earlier, Ghana had its land publicly owned or state owned rather than publicly owned, and then ultimately got itself boycotted by the world, by American factors of capitalism, because they refused to privatize their land. And when the corporations came, it doesn't matter if the people don't want that at all. The corporations now own the land and can do what they wish with it. So exploiting the land for their own profits. And the situation of irrigation in Africa be damned. And local governments, if they refuse, they can either get replaced or voted out because the economy is doing badly. And thus right-wing governments can get in and make things even worse, but they've got more control. They can say, oh well, if we don't have these corporations here, we've got no money. But it's a system of abuse, really, because you can't say no. Otherwise, you get boycotted. And in the situation that Ghana was in, when it ended up in economic ruin because of its boycott from the rest of the world through capitalist, decisions wanting to punish people who didn't subscribe to the profit system. So no, this is something you have to agree with. If you're a TNC and you're taking a nation that's clearly developing and clearly on the bottom end of the scale and just exploiting it for its worth, it's clearly exploitation. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Yeah, no, there shouldn't be an establishment. There shouldn't be a order to the world. This is sort of the similar question to one earlier. So yeah, an easy one to disagree with. Next page. 2/3 through. If you got through that okay, you'll find these propositions on religion a breeze. Astrology accurately explains many things. Yeah, no. Not only are the idea of star signs and stuff being accurate is a bit silly. I mean, I find it interesting learning about different constellations and like different mythologies and how their approaches to it are, because I enjoy history. But beyond that, it's not like a accurate scientific thing. Like even the constellations of the stars that were used for star signs are in different places to where they are now, where they were when they made them. So it's not even accurate within itself, really. So yeah, strongly disagree. You cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree. Moral systems are not dependent on religion, and indeed, religion is not the only form of ideas about philosophy and stuff, and about how one should act. So no, it's easy to disagree with this. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Strongly disagree. Whether you are okay in society should not come down to the personal whim of someone to be altruistic and donate to charity or spend their time helping. It should be a guaranteed right for everyone on the planet to have a home, clean access to water, good air, etc., etc. You shouldn't be dependent on someone else's goodwill. You should be given those things as a right, and that the world does not have that and it needs charity shows that our system has failed to do so, and that has failed the human race in adequately ensuring everyone has access to fair and equal life. So no, there shouldn't be a need for charity. Everyone should have a social, societal place. Some people are naturally unlucky. Strongly disagree. You can use science and reasoning and deductive logic and reasoning to observe things. So, for instance, you roll a dice, you roll a die even, and it comes up with 1 5 times in a row. Yeah, it's unlucky that you got that, but that's not naturally unlucky. That's just a probability. It was unlikely to happen, but it still happened. The idea that someone's born poor and it's like, oh, well, you're just unlucky. Well, no, you can explain that because the system is unfair. You're born into a family that is in the wrong end of capitalism. That's not you naturally being unlucky. That's you ending up on the wrong end of the system. So yeah, this is just it's ridiculous. Luck isn't natural. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree. It's crucial that we keep education secular, because you don't want to be teaching people that there's a set way of religion, and you want secularity. That's pretty basic, I think. I should hope, anyway. My voice is going a little bit. Finally, look at sex. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. Strongly disagree. Marriage is not something that many cultures don't have marriage for one, and it's not the defining nature of humanity. It's a construct made by people, and it's silly to say, oh yeah, you must be having sex within a marriage. Like no, sex is something that autonomous people should be able to choose themselves. So yeah, completely disagree with this. This should be pretty easy to get right, I'd imagine. Same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Strongly agree, of course. I don't think I should need to explain any of these to you. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Strongly agree. If you consent and you want to, broadcast it to the world, then yeah, sure. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Absolutely. There shouldn't even be a state. No one can feel naturally homosexual. We've got like David Duke popping up here or something. Strongly disagree. There's no no natural state of being for a human. Of course, these days, openness about sex has gone too far. Another David Duke question there. Strongly disagree. Again, it's people who be encouraged to explore themselves. And we are finally at the end. Finally going to see where I stand. I can pretty much guess where I'm going to be on this sort of test. Let's see. So we've got our Dale here. Moment of truth. A moment of truth. Got some people here. Moment of truth. Economic left right -8. Social libertarian authoritarian -9.838 even. Yeah, fairly obvious where I was going to be, to be honest. I'm a left-wing person myself. I'm pretty off to the left anyway. I consider myself a communist. I believe the state should not exist. We should have worker ownership of the means of production, classlessness, an end to hierarchy, guaranteed rights for everyone on the planet, regardless of who you are. And this probably reflects that, to be honest. I don't think it should come as a surprise for anyone, because I think we need to overthrow capitalism. I think capitalism is a deeply broken and unfair system. So it's natural I'm going to be left wing. These sort of tests are pretty geared towards libertarianism anyway. Authoritarianism, the questions you saw in that were pretty obvious. Obviously, like going to be rejected by like most people. So even if you are in the sort of Nazi sort of region here, it's not really going to be likely that you'd show up there. However, I think there is a slight flaw in that I wouldn't consider right libertarian and authoritarian left the actual like positions. So, for instance, if you think that if you have left wing ideas about how everyone deserves rights, but then you're authoritarian, you're sort of contradicting yourself. Similarly, if you think a free market is free, but you're a libertarian and you supposedly want freedom, that's a contradiction in a sense as well, in my opinion. So I would have probably not endorsed this model of political ideas, to be honest. But yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Left-wing ideas are primarily about freedom and liberation from hierarchy and authority, and removing a system that is unfair, like capitalism, is a core concept of that. So whilst this test was quite simplistic, it has, I suppose, accurately put me in a very left-wing position. Anyway, to the anonymous user on Curious Cat who insisted I did this, yeah, I hope you've been enlightened as to where I stand politically, if it wasn't already obvious from the stuff I post anyway. Anyway, thank you to anyone who watched, and I'll see you all around. If you have any other suggestions for like tests you want me to take or anything like that, then put it in the comments or ask me on Curious Cat, or even on Twitter, to be honest. But yeah, thank you all for watching.